Seattle is, I mean, Seattle's a great movie-going town, and I know that, Greg Olson at the Seattle Art Museum has been doing a film noir series here. It's the longest-running one, maybe in the world. I mean, like,
yeah,
isn't he going on year 31 or something now?
Yeah, he cleared the 30 mark, I know.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And, I like to think of this as a nice adjunct to what Greg does. I mean, the reason why it's important to keep doing this is because the Film Noir Foundation is responsible for rescuing and restoring a lot of these films, and as part of that mission, it's really important to have a place to show them.
Yeah.
And when we started out, it was really all about preserving the films, right? And now it's become as much about preserving the film-going experience as it is about preserving the films, right? I mean, you go to the time and trouble of saving a film in 35 millimeter, the original form in which the film was made, but you also want to preserve watching those films in 35 millimeter and giving people the opportunity to see the films as they were originally meant to be seen.
Yeah.
And, the culture is changing pretty dramatically, and, we're a digital culture now,
Yeah.
And a lot of people think, oh, I can watch it on a DVD or something.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give them the option of seeing it otherwise, as it was supposed to be seen.
Yeah.
And understand that it's a different experience. I mean, seeing it on the screen bigger than life is way different than watching it on your laptop or your iPod or something.
Yeah. Oh boy, you do sound like you're an old-fashioned kind of guy.
Well, I mean, I understand the value of all the digital technology and the immediacy of it and the convenience of it and the accessibility. I have no problem with all of that. I do have a problem with people then saying, well, this makes having it in 35 millimeters superfluous.
Yeah.
It does not.
Yeah.
I always say, would you say that if you have a photograph of Picasso's Guernica, that's as good as the original work? No, absolutely not.
Now, you mentioned Greg Olson's series. You're right. It's been running for over 30 years. You have an entire raft of movies that you, bring up here and show in Seattle. How many film noir movies are there that you can keep a series going like this? Do you have like a total amount?
I have a long way to go before I run out. Let's put it that way.
Are there hundreds, thousands?
There are. The definition of noir has become pretty elastic.
Yeah.
So, I showed Guns, Girls, and Gangsters with Mamie Van Doren and called it a film noir just because I wanted to get Mamie Van Doren to come out and do an interview, right? It's like, wow. I'll get to talk to Mamie for an hour. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm guilty of twisting the definition of noir to fit my own purposes sometimes.
Very good. Well, why don't you give us a quick Film Noir 101 then? What kind of parameters do you want to give it?
Well, the classic film noir era, when we're talking about Hollywood movies, is the early 1940s to the, like 1954, 55. I mean, Touch of Evil and Odds Against Tomorrow are late 50s. Those are very convenient, as a bookend to the classic period. But, I mean, truthfully, the era is when every studio is making 8 to 10 of these every year, right? So 8 studios in Hollywood, you figure they're making 80 movies a year that you could call film noir. They really started in 1944. They really kind of declined in 1952. So do the math.
There you go, yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of films, right? And of all varying strata, from A-list pictures directed by Billy Wilder, written and directed by Wilder or Otto Preminger, or, George Cukor. We're showing a double life in this series. George Cukor is about as A as it gets in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Down to very obscure B films from Monogram Pictures, which we're showing those as well in this series, right? The Hunted was one of the first pictures made when Monogram became Allied Artists, a totally lost film, until we were able to find original negative, convince Warner Brothers that owns it to deposit it at UCLA, and we funded the preservation print, because it's not a film that Warner Brothers had any commercial use for.
Yeah.
Right? And I said, well, I have use for it, so I'll pay for the print.
Yeah.
Which will stay in the archive at UCLA, and we show it when we have the opportunity to show it, and there's a lot of very grateful people. I mean, that film just has not been seen on a movie screen in decades.
Yeah.
So
Good. So here's the question I have though about film noir. So it has a very not strict, but a very definite sort of historical parameters that you've set around it. 44 to say 52, and a few in the late 50s. But do you think of film noir as a genre like the Western or a musical or something like that, or is it differently defined?
I think it's differently defined.
Okay.
It's almost like an ethos.
Ah.
You know, they were, at the time they were made, they were either classified as murder dramas or crime thrillers, which is really interesting, because if you go back and look at the exhibitors' manuals from that period, right, and these are the what theater owners would subscribe to understand the films that were coming down the pipeline, right? Like Paramount's going to release this, and all of those films in the exhibitor manuals are designated like books in a bookstore, right? This is a self-help, this is a romance, you know, and what I discovered was that all of the films that we now call film noir were either described as a murder drama or a crime thriller. And what distinguishes them, which is pretty fascinating, is murder dramas are where the protagonists are amateur criminals, and crime thrillers are where they are professional criminals. So The Asphalt Jungle is a crime thriller because it's about professional crooks robbing a jewelry store, right? Postman Always Rings Twice is a murder drama because it's about people who never thought they were capable of committing murder, and then they do it. So, I mean, that's what they were designated as at the time.
Yeah.
But what makes them film noir is the way the story is told, the visualization of it. These films did not have to look the way they looked. It was purely an organic, artistic decision. Like, let's try this, you know. And a lot of it had to do with the influence of European emigre directors who had this very stark, highly theatrical look to the films, based largely on art direction and cinematography.
Yeah.
Because it came from a theatrical heritage, right? As opposed to when you got into the 1950s in Hollywood, it started changing to become more an editor's medium. It was how the film was paced and how the film was cut became much more important than how it looked. Films weren't as art directed in the 50s as they were in the 40s, you know. So a lot of that look of film noir is what people really relate to today, because it's a lost art in a sense. The incredible cinematography, the beautiful way the films are art directed, the production design is extraordinary. I mean, we're going to show a film, Stranger on the Third Floor, which was a B film from 1940 that's sort of like the first injection of that European expressionism into a otherwise fairly mundane Hollywood B movie. And it's just stunning. It's like, my God, look at this. There are dream sequences in that film that are just jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
You know? And that's really, you know, that kind of defines noir stylistically. But I always say that it continues in the sense of what is the story? What is the story about? And so I do think there are noir films being made today because they're stories in which the protagonist is doing something wrong. And they know it's wrong, they do it anyway, and they reap the consequences, you know. So for me, like any movie where the protagonist is the cop hunting the bad guy is not really a film noir. If the protagonist is the bad guy, that is really kind of noir to me, you know. I mean, the films are about experiencing the dark side of, you know, human nature or the culture, you know. So yeah, I think noir continues to this day. It just doesn't look the way it looked then.
Yes, and since the look is what so many of us think of as film noir, I wonder if you feel like it's cheapened, or when you see a neo-noir or a contemporary noir, do you feel like, oh, great, the spirit is alive, or do you feel like, well, there's another cheap attack on a...
good film is a good film.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I mean, that's the way I look at it. And I mean, I can really tell the difference to me, pardon me, the difference to me has less to do with the visual stylistics than it has to do with a good story well told. You
Yeah.
know? I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, I taught a film course at Stanford a couple of years ago, and after all of this, 10 weeks, showing films, talking about it and everything, I said, so in conclusion, what's it all about? Good script, well acted. I mean, that's it. It does come down to 4 words, you know? And I still feel that's true.
Now, can you rattle off, you mentioned that there have been some contemporary noirs, anything in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years that you think is, if not classic noir?
I should know this all right off the top of my head. I mean, in many ways, No Country for Old Men is very much a film noir.
Perfect, and how so?
Well, I cannot tell you how many noir films from the classic era begin with somebody discovering a bag of money and not turning it into the authorities. That's like
the first mistake.
Yeah, I have to laugh because here's Cormac McCarthy, right? Arguably America's greatest contemporary writer of fiction. And it's like, wow, even he can't resist the bag of money story. You know? And in a sense, I really thought that's what he was doing with that story, was just saying, well, I'm going to put this mythic existential spin on what's the most basic crime story there is.
Yeah.
You know, a guy walks in, finds a crime scene, dead bodies, bag of money. Here's the answer to all my prayers. It's in this sack of money. And then all hell breaks loose, right?
That's right.
So, I mean, there's no question. I mean, it definitely has McCarthy's, you know, all of his obsession with the American West and, you know, generational things and all that. But that's a crime story.
Yeah. Well, that's great, yeah.